He got away.
You mean he got away?
Well, yeah. Skippy here made sure of that.
Over the years, Pixar have created some of the best written characters in all of fiction. And that doesn't just apply to the heroes in their stories, but also a lot of their villains. So many of their movies have had villains that could be anything from funny to sympathetic to despicable, all while serving as a legitimate threat. The Incredibles had one such villain in the form of Syndrome, simultaneously one of the dorkiest and yet most ruthless and bloodthirsty villains of all time, one that deserved all the attention the character got.
I'm still geeking out about it!
But there's one other antagonist in this movie that doesn't really seem to get as much attention. And it's understandable. I mean, he only has 2 scenes and roughly 3 minutes of screen time, but he makes the most out of every single second. That antagonist is the greedy and corrupt Insuricare supervisor and the former Mr. Incredible's boss, Mr. Gilbert Huff.
I'm not happy, Bob.
Now, in order to talk about Mr. Huff and his relationship with Mr. Incredible, I think we need to first figure out the type of workplace that he enforces. The first time we see Insuricare comes immediately following a newsreel announcing that superhero work is now illegal.
Where are they now? They are living among us, quietly and anonymously, continuing to make the world a better place.
Denied?
Only to immediately cut to an old woman sinking into despair as Mr. Incredible, now going exclusively by the name Bob Parr, denies her an insurance claim that she desperately needs.
And if you can't help me, I don't know what I'll do.
I've occasionally seen people discuss this scene, describing it as Bob going from exciting work fighting crime to boring, mundane office work. But I don't think it's quite as simple as that, though. Think about it this way, an insurance company is supposed to help those in need. We can infer that after Bob was banned from hero work, he kept inventing new ways to try to help however he could, and we can assume that that's why he applied for that line of work.
I'd like to help.
But Lord knows the company doesn't make it easy for him, as we can see him having to deny help to a frail, crying old woman, all because her claim doesn't fall under the conveniently inconvenient policy that Insuricare has laid out.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Hoganson, but our liability is spelled out in paragraph 17.
But despite that, look at the way he handles it. Initially, he can barely bring himself to sympathize with her and just seems more fed up than anything. But he quickly works up the effort to help and speedily recites instructions on how to make Insuricare's policies work for her.
I also do not advise you to fill out and file a WS-2475 form with our legal department on the 2nd floor. I would not expect someone to get back to you quickly to resolve the matter.
The fact that someone who we've seen is usually so eager to help is suddenly so exhausted with a helpless individual and also has such an obscure and apparently frowned upon solution just readily available tells us that Insuricare's obstacle course of an insurance service is just something he's had to deal with long past the point of any tolerance. His client leaves pretending to be upset as instructed.
I know you're upset.
Pretend to be upset.
And we get our introduction to Mr. Huff, his first action being walking toward an apparently devastated client and shoving her out of the way. Clearly an unhappy customer, or even just common courtesy, isn't what he considers a priority. Instead, his main concern seems to be chastising Bob for paying a client the insurance that they were evidently owed.
Their policy clearly covers him against
I don't want to know
any
about their
litigation.
coverage, Bob! Don't tell me about their coverage!
Remember what I said about this not just being about Bob's boredom? It isn't simply a case of being a superhero is fun and being an office worker is lame. It's about how Bob has gone from being a superhero, one of the most recognizable forces for good and peace in all of pop culture, to a pawn for a dishonest company that is actively trying to discourage him from doing the right thing. Although we do see that Bob's job isn't exactly cushy for him either, as the scene ends with this wide shot showing that half his cubicle is taken up by a massive pillar complete with a high voltage electrical box. And Bob doesn't exactly strike me as a guy who fits well into tight spaces. Oh, and also there's this one announcement from the office's PA system.
Morning break is over. Morning break is over.
Yeah, so all of this, Bob speaking with a client, Mr. Huff coming in to discuss business, even a few other employees working at other cubicles, all of that was apparently happening during what is supposed to be the employee's break period. Admittedly though, if it is morning like the PA system says, it is a little weird when Helen calls Bob and says,
Oh, I gotta go pick up the kids from school.
A little over 10 minutes later in the film, we once again see Bob in his cubicle where he gets a call.
Mr. Huff would like to talk to you in his office.
And you can kind of tell from the tone of Mr. Huff's secretary's voice that working for this guy isn't exactly fun for anyone else, not just Bob.
Now?
The scene cuts to Huff's office with him sharpening a pencil with Insuricare slogan, "Your life is in our hands." Comforting. He places the pencil neatly alongside the others on his desk and asks Bob to sit, only for Bob to accidentally shake the desk with his weight, knocking the pencil out of place. Just another example of Bob disrupting Insuricare's overly strict workplace. Fitting considering what Mr. Huff is about to discuss. He's not happy with Bob.
Not happy. Ask me why.
From the very start of the scene, Mr. Huff is leading Bob's side of the conversation, allowing Bob as little control as possible. It seems that Bob's customers have been causing problems for the company.
What, you've gotten complaints?
Complaints I can handle. What I can't handle is your customers' inexplicable knowledge of Insuricare's inner workings.
You gotta love how proudly he admits that unsatisfied customers are just not something that matter to him and how easily he can get rid of them, but when he actually has to give them the money they're owed, that's when he gets mad. And they are owed. He openly calls the terms of Insuricare's policies obstacles.
Exploiting every loophole, dodging every obstacle.
Bob retaliates by pointing out that he hasn't broken any rules and that he's been an objectively good employee by getting the best possible results for his clients. A fact that Mr. Huff can't disagree with as much as he clearly wishes he could.
Are you saying we shouldn't help our customers?
The law requires that I answer no.
The conversation progresses a little further and Bob suddenly notices a mugging outside the window. And sure, Mr. Huff has his flaws, but he's a high-level member of an insurance company that's dedicated to helping people in situations like this. Surely he's got to feel some level of responsibility, especially in a situation like this where he really has nothing to lose.
Do not change the subject, Bob.
Wishful thinking on my part, I suppose. Bob's superhero instincts kick in and he goes to help, but Mr. Huff is not having it.
Stop right now, or you're fired!
Bob stops in his tracks and a smile creeps onto Mr. Huff's face, which tells us that his treatment of Bob goes beyond apathy for him and his clients. He outright enjoys having control over them.
Get over here now.
Bob complies, his composure on the brink of collapse, and notices the mugger running off. As someone who dedicated his life to stopping people like this, the fact that he allowed a criminal to get away leaves him seething with anger towards himself. You can't really blame him for doing it. He's the only provider for a family of 5. He knows how important his job is. That is, until he forgets for a split second when Mr. Huff says this.
He got away.
Good thing, too.
In the span of 3 words, all that pent-up anger Bob had gets redirected towards Huff, and he snaps.
I'm fired, aren't I?
Oh, you think?
I think Mr. Huff is a bit of an underrated character. Oh, sure, he's got plenty of quotable lines, made even better by the delivery of Wallace Shawn, who's entertaining as always.
Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
But you don't see many people talk about what an enjoyably hateable bastard he is, or how well the movie portrays that through clever and nuanced visuals and dialogue. And he's a great showcase for how a minor antagonist can be a great asset for a story, and how they can have just as interesting of a dynamic with a hero as the main villain. The last thing I want to touch on is one particular shot from Mr. Huff's office. On my most recent viewing of the movie for this video, one question suddenly occurred to me. Why is there just a random shot of a piece of paper in the middle of Bob and Mr. Huff's conversation? The characters don't directly address it, it's not on screen long enough to read, and it never becomes relevant later on. So I took a deeper look, and I think it would be great to close out this video by reading it out. Memo, policy notification. Due to financial cutbacks, you will now be expected to self-expense all office supplies, including but not limited to pencils, erasers, pens, paper, stationery, folders, staples, paper clips, brads, and photocopies. All parking will now be metered by the hour. Electricity consumption and all telephone charges will be deducted from your paycheck. Great, so Insuricare's employees are basically expected to fund the company's expenses for them so that they can get paid and then just repeat the process. The board of directors at Insuricare wishes to thank you for your selfless sacrifice through this time of financial uncertainty. Pretty sure a selfless sacrifice implies that they had any choice in the matter and this wasn't just being imposed upon them by the people who are benefiting. It is because of you, the employee, that Insuricare has recorded its highest profit in years. And yet you need to make cutbacks and are in a time of financial uncertainty. Sure. Remember, a successful company makes for successful,
Can't read that one, my thumb's over it.
well, you get the idea. Mr. Huff helps to run an evil, money-grubbing corporation that regularly exploits both its customers and its employees. There's probably a joke to be made about Disney somewhere in there, but I think you get my point. Anyway, if you like this video, then consider supporting me on Patreon. I promise I'll treat you better than Mr. Huff treats his customers because you'll get to see videos appear on my Patreon before they come out on YouTube. Take care of yourself.